Hello, friends. Kitty here, and welcome to the first episode of Rebel News, where each week I attempt to discuss and uncover some international news stories and current events that you otherwise might have missed, but that I thought were important and worth noting. So thank you for joining us, and with that, let's get to our first story. So our first story for the day, January 12th, 2024, is Turkish occupation forces cut off water and power in northeast Syria. So Human Rights Watch today actually released a report stating that Syrians, due to increasing strain from Turkish forces as well as Assad's regime forces, are currently in a state of humanitarian crisis. About 90% of Syrians live in poverty, and increasing strikes have destroyed much of the infrastructure in northeast Syria. So that would be closer to the Turkish border. Human Rights Watch estimates that millions of people within Syria could be without water and power, which is a pretty serious situation. Next, we have Syrian defense forces crack down on ISIS in several territories. So in addition to the rise in Turkish attacks, Syrians have been stepping up defensive operations against the extremist organization ISIS. Several operations took place over the past week, detaining and killing ISIS leaders throughout the country. ISIS has been highly active in recent months and has killed over 100 Assad soldiers. It's like upwards of 20 to 30 per day, depending on the incident. They've killed of the Assad regime and also several martyred Syrian defense forces. The struggle with ISIS speaks to the chaotic political situation in Syria, as interests can sometimes overlap between the regime and local militias in terms of how to deal with ISIS. In the past 12 years, it is estimated ISIS has killed more than 5,000 Syrian civilians. However, this still pales in comparison to the 200,000 estimated to have been killed by the Assad regime. Alright, so this next story is one of the more dramatic, but I'm surprised isn't talked about more in the Western media. But a UN helicopter was seized by Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Al-Shabaab, which is an extremist Sunni military organization in Somalia, seized a UN helicopter after it was forced to land on Wednesday. The cause why it had to land isn't exactly sure. It hit something and then it had to land, but it landed in Al-Shabaab territory, and everyone was taken prisoner, and one was killed. The occupants were contracted by the UN, but did include military personnel as well as medical supplies. So 2 possibly escaped as well, but the details on that are sort of unclear at the moment. Tensions in general have been on the rise in Somalia, as there's been attempts to contain the breakaway state of Somaliland, which, if many folks might know, Somaliland is kind of the Chinese, Russia-backed faction in the region. And so this sort of really threw some more gas on the fire there. Overlooked one here: the increased calls in Iraq for coalition forces to leave entirely. So politicians in Iraq are finally calling for the US-led coalition forces in the area to leave for good. The US currently operates several bases in Iraq and even continues to carry out attacks in the country. In a recent incident, the U.S. killed several members of a local militia, which was considered, I guess, according to the Iraqi parliament, part of the official military there. So that sort of definitely angered a lot of folks in the establishment there. It is unclear how the Iraqi government intends to actually respond and compel the United States to do this, but the Department of Defense has released a statement that they have no intention of leaving. So I guess we'll see how that develops, but clearly the U.S. has no intention of leaving anytime soon without a fight. kind of a big event to be on the watch for. Elections are scheduled to take place on January 13th in Taiwan. Taiwan is primarily led by two parties that have sort of alternated control since democratic elections started in 1996. Currently, the incumbent U.S.-aligned Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, led by William Lai Ching-te, currently leads in the polls and is expected to win, but is being challenged jointly by the Beijing-aligned Kuomintang and the independent Taiwan People's Party, which has sort of united a ticket together against the Democratic Progressive Party. And there's a lot of folks that are sort of eager to see how that one pans out. Again, it's expected that the Democratic Progressive Party will remain in power, but who's to say? In our next story here, protests have been on the rise once again in Iran against the ruling government. Among them are the Kurds of eastern Kurdistan and western Iran. Several demonstrators were arrested on Wednesday and sentenced to several years in prison. Many received as much as 10, and a couple of them received 2-year sentences for allegedly being a part of the Jinjian Azadi movement. The Jinjian Azadi movement, otherwise known as Women, Life, Freedom in Kurmanji, is a resurging movement throughout the whole region, really, but has really taken a hold in Iran with particularly anti-government sympathetic individuals, because for a lot of reasons, the Jinjian Azadi movement is closely aligned with the ideals of the Kurdish Workers' Party and its leader, Abdullah Öcalan. It centers around the ideas of women's revolution, democratic modernity, as they call it, and social justice that often contradict the official policies of the Iranian regime. And for our final story here, recently, January 1st through the 12th, marked the 30th anniversary of the Zapatista Uprising. And this was celebrated by a group of YPJ fighters. So during the actual uprising, occurred in 1994, and the Zapatista Army of National Liberation occupied parts of Chiapas, Mexico, in protest of the North American Free Trade Agreement, known as NAFTA. The Zapatistas were a left-leaning anarchist organization led by the indigenous peoples of Mexico. During the time, there were battles with the Mexican army. The Zapatistas occupied several towns. I think about as much as 300 people died, and a ceasefire was eventually negotiated. A legacy endured, however, that led to the passage of significant social reforms throughout Mexico and left kind of a strong political activist sentiment among the indigenous peoples. And to this day, the Zapatistas remain and are still politically active and around. This past Sunday, members of the Syrian Women's Protection Units, otherwise known as the YPJ, celebrated this anniversary and expressed solidarity with the Zapatistas. Internationalism is a core tenet of the YPJ and Kurdistan Workers' Party. Although peoples and the places may differ, they are all united by common ideals of revolution and civil justice, liberty, and these kinds of things. So, thank you for joining, friends, for this first installment. I'll probably play around with the format a little bit, we'll see. But I hope that was enjoyable and informative and at least somewhat concise. Look forward to these each week, hopefully on Fridays. And as always, love you, fam. Bye.